I was 14, old enough to stay home alone, old enough to insist to my mom that I didn't need a babysitter. She worked night shifts as a nurse, and I had long since gotten used to the quiet of the house without her. Usually, it didn't bother me. That night, I had just finished eating dinner and was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of glass breaking. It came from the back of the house. At first I froze, hoping maybe I had imagined it, but then came the shuffle of footsteps, the creak of the floorboards. My stomach dropped. Someone was inside. No, multiple someones. I didn't have time to think. I slid off the couch as quietly as I could and hurried to my room. I knew I had only seconds before they started moving through the house. The moment I got inside, I eased my closet door open and squeezed behind some old boxes of winter clothes and junk my mom never got around to throwing out. Then I crouched down, arms wrapped around my knees, and pressed my forehead against them. I shut my eyes and tried not to breathe. The voices were low, but I could hear them moving through the house, pulling out drawers, knocking things over. One of them laughed when something shattered. They weren't in a hurry. They knew no one was home, or at least they thought no one was. Then heavy footsteps entered my room. A rustle, a drawer opening, my mattress shifting as something was lifted, then tossed back down, then closer, just in front of me. The closet door slid open. I could feel him there. My hands clamped over my head. 10 seconds passed. Then the footsteps turned. I heard him leave the room, joining the other man in the hallway. He never shut the door. They stayed for a while longer, tearing the place apart, taking whatever they could carry. I didn't move an inch, not even after I heard the front door open and close. Not even after silence settled over the house after a few minutes of their absence. I stayed there until I forced myself to believe they were really gone. Then I crawled out of the closet and reached for my phone with trembling fingers. I called my mom first. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy but alert, the second she heard the tremble in mine. Call the police right now. They came within minutes. My house was a disaster. Drawers dumped, furniture overturned, my mom's jewelry box emptied. They had taken everything they could find that was worth anything, but all I could think about was that closet. That man had opened the door. He had looked inside. From where he stood, he should have seen me. I wasn't buried under anything. I wasn't hidden well. All he had to do was glance down, and I would have been right there. But he didn't. Or maybe he did, and he just decided to walk away. I'll never know for sure. If you're enjoying the video so far, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Any support would be greatly appreciated. I was 19 the summer I worked as a counselor at Camp Blackwood. It was an old-school summer camp deep in the woods of Vermont, the kind of place where kids ran around all day, swimming in the lake, playing capture the flag, and making lanyards. I had signed up for the job with a couple of my college friends, thinking it would be a fun way to make some money while spending the summer outdoors. For the most part, it was. But something happened that summer, something I still can't explain. It started one night in early July. A group of us counselors were sitting around a campfire after the kids had gone to bed. It was a clear, warm night, and the only sounds were the crackling fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. We were just talking, laughing, passing around a bag of marshmallows, when I saw it. A quick, bright flash coming from the woods. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but my stomach clenched the moment I saw it. It wasn't lightning, there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and it didn't seem like fireflies either. It was artificial, like the flash of a camera. I looked around at the others, waiting for someone to say something, but nobody had even flinched. They just kept talking, completely unaware. I debated mentioning it, but I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I let it go. Maybe I had imagined it. The next morning, I had almost convinced myself it was nothing. The day was busy, like every day at camp. Morning flagpole, breakfast, swimming, arts and crafts. By the time the afternoon heat rolled in, I was covered in dirt and lake water, so I went back to my dorm to take a quick shower before dinner. The showers were in a separate building from the cabins, a long, narrow bathroom with stalls on one side and sinks on the other. I stepped under the water, scrubbing away the sweat and grime of the day. The window near the ceiling was open just a crack, letting in a soft breeze. Then, another flash. It had come from the window. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I turned off the water, listening. I couldn't hear anything outside. No footsteps, no movement, just the rustling of the trees. I wrapped a towel around myself and ran to the door, yanking it open and looking out. The clearing outside the showers was empty. No one was there. Somebody had just taken a picture of me. I dressed quickly, my hands shaking, and went straight to my supervisor, Mark. He was in his office, going over paperwork, when I walked in. "Hey, I need to tell you something," I said, shutting the door behind me. "I think someone's watching me, taking pictures of me." "What do you mean?" I told him about the flash in the woods the night before and what had just happened in the shower. He listened carefully, then let out a sigh. "That's concerning," he admitted. "I'll look into it. Maybe one of the staff members was messing around with a camera." I didn't like that answer. It felt dismissive, like he didn't believe me. But I nodded and left. I stayed up late, reading in my bunk, until I finally decided to get ready for bed. The counselor dorms were in an old wooden building, a long hallway with rooms on either side. Most of the lights were off as I walked to the bathroom, my flip-flops slapping against the floor. Then, just as I turned the corner at the end of the hall, another flash. This time, it was just 20 feet away. I barely processed what I was seeing before my body took over. I spun around and ran. I sprinted down the hall and pounded on Mark's door. He opened it, startled. "What's wrong?" he asked. "I'm done," I gasped. "I'm leaving tomorrow. Someone is following me, Mark. They were just at the end of the hall." He must have seen the panic in my face, because his expression turned serious. He nodded and stepped aside. "You can sleep in here tonight," he said, motioning to a cot in the corner of his room. I barely slept. Every creak of the old building made me flinch. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for another flash, but none came. At sunrise, I went back to my room to pack. The air felt stale, thick with something I couldn't name. As I approached my bed, I saw something that made my stomach drop. 3 photographs. They were laid out in a perfect row, right on top of my blanket. I picked them up with trembling fingers. The first one was me at the campfire, staring into the flames, completely unaware. The second was through the bathroom window, my silhouette behind the fogged-up glass. And the third, me, frozen in the hallway, eyes wide with fear, just seconds after I had seen the flash. I dropped the pictures and stumbled back. I grabbed my bag and left camp that morning. Mark didn't try to stop me. He promised to investigate, but I never heard from him again. To this day, I don't know who took those pictures or why. I was 23 when I moved into my first real apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small, 1-bedroom unit in an older complex on the outskirts of Denver. At the time, I was working long hours as a receptionist at a dental office, so I wasn't home much. When I was, I kept to myself. I wasn't the type to make small talk with neighbors, and most of the people in the building seemed just as uninterested in socializing. I had been living there for about 2 months when I first noticed something. One night, I came home late and found my front door unlocked. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the doorknob. I was certain I had locked it. I always did. For a moment, I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That I thought someone had been inside? That wasn't a crime. Besides, nothing was missing. My laptop was still on the coffee table. My purse, my keys, everything was exactly where I had left it. Still, I started double-checking my locks after that. I even bought one of those cheap door wedges to jam under the door at night, just in case. Then, things got worse. One evening, after a long day at work, I went to take a shower. As soon as I stepped into the bathroom, a chill ran down my spine. The air was damp, more than it should have been, like someone had just taken a hot shower. I touched the sink. It was wet. My stomach dropped. I lived alone. I backed out of the bathroom and grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, my hairdryer, clutching it like a weapon as I checked every inch of my apartment. There was no one there. The windows were locked. The door was still wedged shut. I barely slept that night. By the next day, I had convinced myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe the pipes had backed up, causing condensation. Maybe I had left the sink dripping. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. The real breaking point came about a week later. I had gotten home late from work and was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a noise, a dull thump. It was coming from the hallway. Then I heard it again, a soft, dragging noise, like something shifting against the floor. I stood slowly, my hands shaking. The noise was coming from the coat closet near my front door. I didn't move. I just stared at the closet door. The sound came again, a faint creak, and then the handle twitched. I grabbed my keys and bolted out of my apartment. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, doors locked, hands trembling as I tried to catch my breath. I called the police. When they arrived, 2 officers searched my apartment. At first, they didn't find anything. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, nothing missing. I was starting to feel like I had imagined it when one of the officers called out from the hallway. I followed them over and saw what he was pointing at. The coat closet's back panel, an old, flimsy piece of plywood, was slightly ajar. The officer pulled it open, revealing a dark, narrow space behind it. A crawl space. And inside, they found a sleeping bag, a water bottle, food wrappers. Someone had been living there. I don't remember much after that. I was too busy trying not to throw up. The officers searched the crawl space, but it was empty. Whoever had been inside must have slipped out when I ran. I packed a bag that night and stayed at a friend's place. The next morning, I broke my lease. I didn't care about the penalties. I just wanted out. To this day, I don't know how long he had been in there, how many nights I had gone to sleep, completely unaware that someone was just a few feet away, listening. In 2011, when I was 25, I took a job as a live-in caretaker for an elderly woman named Margaret Leland. She lived alone in a big, decaying Victorian house at the end of a quiet street in a small Pennsylvania town. I had been struggling to find steady work, so when I saw the ad in the local paper, live-in caretaker needed, room and board included, it felt like an easy way to save money while figuring out my next step. The job itself wasn't hard. Margaret was in her 80s, frail but sharp, and mostly needed help with household chores and errands. She kept to herself, spending most of her time in her room, which left me alone in the house more often than not. At first, the house just felt old. Creaky floors, drafty windows, that faint, musty smell of a place that hadn't been aired out in years. But after a few weeks, I started noticing things, like the rocking chair in the parlor that sometimes faced a different direction in the morning, the kitchen door, which had a habit of swinging open no matter how hard I latched it, the attic door at the end of the hall, which I swore I closed one night, only to find it open the next morning. I told myself it was just the quirks of an old house, settling wood, faulty hinges, nothing more. Then, one night, I woke up to footsteps, soft, deliberate steps moving just outside my bedroom door. I sat up in bed and listened. The house was silent. Margaret was the only other person in the house, and she could barely make it down the stairs without help. There was no way she had been walking around. Still, I convinced myself I must have imagined it. Until it happened again, and again. Always at night. Always the same slow, careful steps, as if someone was pacing just outside my door. I started locking my bedroom at night. One afternoon, I finally worked up the nerve to ask Margaret if she had ever heard anything strange in the house. She looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read, like she had been expecting the question. "It's just the house," she said simply. "It's old. It remembers things." That wasn't exactly reassuring. The next night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a soft creaking sound. I groggily sat up and turned toward my bedroom door. It was open. I knew I had locked it. I was sure of it. A sick, cold feeling washed over me. I grabbed the lamp from my nightstand and stood up, heart pounding in my ears. The hallway was pitch black, but I could feel it. Someone was there. I fumbled for the light switch, and the moment the bulb flickered on, I saw it. A shadow. Not a trick of the light. Not my imagination. A tall, thin figure standing at the end of the hall, just in front of the attic door. It didn't move. It just stood there, motionless. I couldn't breathe. My fingers tightened around the lamp as I backed into my room and slammed the door shut, locking it again. I barely slept. At sunrise, I packed my bags. I didn't care if I lost my job. I was done. But before I could leave, Margaret stopped me. "You saw him, didn't you?" she asked. I didn't answer. She sighed, staring down at her hands. "My husband built this house," she said softly. "He never wanted to leave." I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't want to know. I left that morning and never looked back. A year later, I looked up the house online. Margaret had passed away. The listing described the home as Victorian with historical charm, but it was the final sentence that sent a shiver down my spine. The property includes a fully furnished attic space with a small hidden room behind the far wall. Back in 2010, when I was 23, I took a job working the night shift at a small hotel in Cincinnati. It wasn't anything fancy, just a 3-story building with about 50 rooms, the kind of place business travelers and road trippers stopped for a night before moving on. I worked the front desk from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Most nights were quiet. I'd check in the occasional late arrival, do some paperwork, and fight to stay awake until the morning staff showed up. The place always felt a little eerie at night. The empty hallways, the hum of the vending machines, the way the security cameras made everything look slightly distorted. But one night, I noticed something strange. I was watching the security feed, just flipping through the different camera angles out of boredom, when I saw movement on the 3rd floor. There was no one booked in any of the rooms up there that night. I leaned in, watching the screen carefully. The hallway was empty, but something had definitely moved. A shadow, maybe? A trick of the light? Then I saw it. A vent cover at the end of the hallway near the ceiling was slightly askew. I stared at it for a long moment. It hadn't been like that earlier. I was sure of it. I switched to a different camera, one that covered the stairwell, and watched for movement. Nothing. I grabbed the master key and went upstairs. The hallway was silent. No hum of a TV from inside the rooms, no footsteps, just the quiet buzz of the overhead lights. I walked toward the vent. It wasn't just loose. It had been removed and set aside, leaving a dark, gaping hole in the wall. A space just big enough for someone to crawl through. I shone my flashlight into the vent. The metal walls stretched into darkness, twisting out of sight. I stepped back. Then I heard it. A faint scraping sound coming from inside the vents. I turned and got the hell out of there. I went straight to the manager's office and woke him up, trying to explain what I had seen. He looked skeptical, but followed me upstairs anyway. By the time we got back to the hallway, the vent cover was back in place, like it had never been removed. I tried to show him the security footage, but the system had glitched. The feed from the third floor was just static for the past hour. He dismissed it, saying I must have been tired and imagining things. I knew what I had seen. The next night, I came in for my shift, but I refused to go to the third floor. I stayed at the front desk, keeping an eye on the cameras. Around 3 a.m., I heard something, a soft thud, then another, like someone was moving through the walls. I checked the cameras, but everything looked normal. Then the phone at the front desk rang. I picked it up. For a moment, there was just silence. Then breathing, coming from the other end of the line. I hung up, my hands shaking. That was my last night working there. I quit the next morning. A few weeks later, I looked up the hotel out of curiosity. Buried in an old news article, I found something that made my blood run cold. Years before I worked there, a man had been caught living inside the walls. He had crawled through the vents at night, watching guests through the air grates, stealing food when no one was looking. They never found out how long he had been there. And worse, they never found out where he went. It was 2013, and I was 26 when it happened. I was on a solo road trip, something I had always wanted to do. Just me, my car, and the open road. No schedule, no real destination, just driving and stopping wherever I felt like it. I had been on the road for about a week when I found myself in rural Montana, somewhere between Glacier National Park and nothing at all. Cell service was a joke, and the radio only played static. The road stretched for miles with nothing but empty fields and dense forest on either side. It was late evening when I saw the detour sign, bright orange, standing on the side of the road with an arrow pointing to a smaller, unpaved road leading into the woods. I was tired. I had been looking for a place to stop for the night, and I figured the detour might lead to a small town, or at least a gas station. So I turned. The gravel road was rough, full of potholes and loose rocks. After about 20 minutes, I realized something was wrong. The detour signs had stopped. No more arrows, no markers, just trees. I slowed down, my hands tightening on the wheel. The road was getting narrower, the trees denser. There was nowhere to turn around. Then I saw the cabin. It sat just off the road, nestled between the trees, like it had been swallowed by the forest. The wood was dark, almost black with age, and the windows were covered with grime. There was no driveway, no signs of life, just a single wooden door, slightly open. I didn't want to stop. Every instinct in me screamed to keep going, to get out of there. But the road had become so narrow I could barely drive. I pulled up just enough to see inside the open door. It was dark, but I could make out a chair in the center of the room. Something was sitting in it. At first, I thought it was a person. Then I realized it wasn't moving. A mannequin. An old, filthy mannequin slumped in the chair like it had been abandoned there for years. My stomach turned. That's when I saw the camera. It was mounted on a tripod. The lens was pointed directly at me. I slammed the car into reverse, my tires skidding on the loose gravel. I struggled to back up, the trees scraping against the sides of my car. Then I saw something in my rearview mirror. A figure standing in the trees, just barely visible between the trunks, tall and motionless, watching. I didn't think. I just hit the gas, forcing my way backward down the narrow road, my car bouncing wildly over the uneven ground. It felt like forever before I finally reached the main road again. When I did, I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just kept driving. It wasn't until I was miles away that I pulled over, hands shaking as I tried to catch my breath. My tires were scratched to hell from the branches, and my bumper had taken a beating, but I didn't care. I checked my phone. Still no service. I don't know what I stumbled into that day. A trap? Some kind of sick joke? Something worse? I'll never know. But I do know one thing. That detour sign wasn't there the next time I drove through that area.